Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome back to SEND Searchlights for 2026. How are we here already? The years just seem to fly by. If you celebrated the festive period, we hope you had a wonderful time and a relaxing break. Although if it's anything like me, that seems like months ago already. I can't remember what happened at all. So as I said, welcome to SEND Searchlights. If you joined us in December, you'll know that this session is all about answering your questions. So we haven't got a particular theme or a topic. We've just reacted to questions submitted by you from our last session. So thank you to those of you who did submit questions. We did have a varied range, so we're going to cover a couple of topics today. But we do hope there'll be something that maybe piques your interest or perhaps will inspire you to find out more. So we will get started. Now, our first question focuses on reading, and this feels very fitting because here in the UK, 2026 marks the National Year of Reading. And while this is currently a national campaign, its core philosophy, which is about shifting from reading as a duty, as a job, as just something you do, to actually reading for pleasure and reading as a passion. So in essence, it's offering a blueprint that actually could be applied worldwide. So the question that we've had from one of our previous attendees is, how can we support pupils who need to read texts or questions but have a low reading age? And we thought this was a really great question to share because it's got a bit of a two-part answer. So I'm going to take one part and then Debbie will take the second part. And the first part that I thought would be really interesting to look at and explore together is the concept of a reading age. Because while reading ages provide a snapshot of information, we would always advocate for using the standard age score, so the SAS, as this can be a much more meaningful measure when we're looking at assessments. So whatever assessment you're doing, whether it is a Renaissance product or something different, I expect that you'll have a reading age and then a standardized score of some sort. So that's what we wanted to explore today. So a reading age, that metric accounts for a child's, the standard age score accounts for a child's age, but it allows us to compare their performance fairly against the national average. And you can accurately track whether they are making real progress over time. So I thought to explain that in a little bit more detail, we'd share some examples of how it works. So on the surface, without any other information, a reading age of, say, 10 and a half years doesn't tell you if the child is 9 years old and performing brilliantly or 11-year-old and struggling. However, with a SAS, two students can achieve the same raw score, but the younger student will receive a higher SAS, because it's being adjusted for age. So this ensures that younger students in a year group are not unfairly disadvantaged to compare to their older peers, who potentially have had up to 12 months more exposure to language and schooling. You can also make meaningful comparisons with the SAS. Reading ages can become increasingly unreliable as children get older. So a reading age of 15 for a 12-year-old may be helpful, but what does a reading age of 17 actually mean for a 15-year-old? The growth in reading ages slows down significantly in those teenage years, making that metric a little bit less sensitive. But because the SAS is a scale, so it ranges from 59 to 141 in the case of our products, it tells you exactly where a student sits in relation to the national population. A score of 100 is always average, and that remains consistent regardless of the student's actual age. And then finally, let's think about progress. So SAS can provide accurate tracking for progress. If a child's reading age increases by 6 months over a 6-month period, they have simply stayed the same relative to their peers. However, that can often be misinterpreted as improvement. And then on the other hand, a child with an above average reading age may appear to stop progressing because they hit that ceiling of the reading age scale. However, let's go back to the SAS. If a student's SAS score stays at 105 over a 2-year period, they are maintaining that steady average position. If their SAS moves from 100 to 110, you've got that proof that they are making more than expected progress compared to the national trend. Now, that's a lot of information to take in, especially if you're over here in the UK or Europe, where it's quite early still in the morning. So it's a lot to take in, and obviously you can look at the recording again to go through it. But what we do have is a short data spotlight video, and it's a bite-sized video. It's great for understanding reading ages and where they can be useful, and where that SAS can really come into its own as well. So I will pop a link into the chat for that really short video. As I say, it's about a minute or two. Great for sharing with staff if you're doing some CPD, or those people who just need a bit of a real life concept to understand some of that data terminology. So I will pop a link into the chat with the data spotlight video, and I'll hand over to Debbie, who's going to answer part 2 of the question about how we can support those lower readers.
Thank you, Polly. So we have now identified the best data to use when looking at analysing reading data, but let's revisit the main theme of the question with regards to how we can support pupils with the reading of text and questions who may be struggling with reading. The first step is to ensure that we have the most accurate reading data. Assessments such as the NGRT, STAR Reading, STAR Early Literacy are all adaptive assessments which are designed to support those struggling readers. The adaptive nature of the tests ensure that the learners can access questions suitable to their literacy level and will then adapt up or down depending on each response. For students of lower ability who may be working below age-related expectations, for example, a Year 7 student working at a Year 4 level, STAR Reading and STAR Early Literacy allow teachers to adjust the starting point of the assessment. This ensures that pupils can access assessments appropriately and that the data collected accurately reflects their current level of attainment. In addition, the assessments can be paused and completed over multiple days, as long as they're completed within 8 calendar days. And that helps students that experience difficulties with attention. Time can also be extended for students with slower processing speeds, ensuring that the assessment remains accessible and inclusive. For students who complete the assessment in a very short time, steps can be taken to ensure the assessment is completed with fidelity and that the results accurately reflect their ability. In such cases, students may be encouraged to read the questions and answer options aloud to a member of staff before selecting the response they believe to be correct. This approach helps ensure that the test results are reliable and valid, producing an NRSS, which is a normed reference standardized score, which is comparable to the SAS score that Polly was talking about that's used in NGRT, alongside a reading age and a ZPD, or Zone of Proximal Development. The ZPD range supports students in selecting texts that are appropriately challenging, ensuring that the students read books at an optimal level for their ability. High-low books, which are high interest but low reading age, are an effective way to encourage students with low reading ages to engage with and enjoy reading. While the reading age of the text is lower, the themes, vocabulary, and context remain age-appropriate and engaging. Graphic novels can also be used as a valuable stepping stone, helping to motivate reluctant readers or students with a lower reading age by reducing cognitive load while maintaining interest. Reading aloud to groups of students further promotes reading for pleasure, particularly for lower ability or reluctant readers. Selecting age-appropriate, entertaining text helps to build engagement, confidence, and positive reading habits. Mayon can also be used to support students with low reading ability and also any English as an Additional Language students or EAL students. For those of you who are unaware of MyON, let's explore this in a little more detail. MyON is an online digital library and classroom teaching tool, which comes with a vast variety of text and has multiple tools within it to support both classroom practice and students' independent reading. MyON can be used from reception through to the end of Key Stage 4 and can be accessed on computers, tablets, and also via an offline app on iPads and Android. Students are provided with individual reading recommendations in line with their interests, where students can read and listen to books within the classroom setting or at home. For students with low reading ability, or indeed EAL students, MyON has the option for students to have the books read to them, giving the student the experience of listening to the spoken language. The students can also slow down the guided audio if they need to listen more carefully, and can also use the available tools to highlight words and sentences, which makes it a great resource. The dictionary within MyON is a fabulous tool for them to build up their knowledge of words, and if they use it in conjunction with the journal, they can create their own dictionary. Students can use MyON as part of their daily reading practice, and teachers can use non-fiction books and MyON news articles to support students' knowledge of wider curriculum subjects such as science. The record function on MyON is also great for showing progress. They can use the record facility to record their reading if they do this on a regular basis. For example, every few weeks. This will show their continued improvement in fluency and pronunciation. In our March session, we will be talking about the National Year of Reading in more detail and focusing on specific learning barriers, for example, dyslexia. So do join us for that if you would like to find out more. I'll hand you back over to Polly now for our final question.
Thanks, Debbie. I remember when I was teaching and I provided children with those high interest, low reading age books, it made such a difference. And that engagement in reading, you could really see increase. So if you don't have those within your setting, definitely recommend having a look for those. So I'll move on to our final question, which is how can I support children in my school with speech and language delay? And as I'm sure many of you are aware, this is something that's really common. It's on the increase that children are starting school with very limited speech and language skills. So it's sort of high on the agenda. And if we can get early intervention in place to support that, then obviously children are going to be more successful as they move through the school system. So to support children with speech and language delay in your school, you can implement that structured assess, plan, do, review approach. And one tool that you might be interested in is our Welcome Toolkit. And this is a screening tool to identify which children are struggling with speech and language and in which specific areas. So it's a universal screener. It takes 10 to 15 minutes per child, and it doesn't require a speech and language therapist to administer, which is a real bonus because, as we know, those professionals can sometimes be quite difficult to get hold of. And because it's an increasing issue among schools, there can be quite a waiting list as well. So that's the first step, that actually this can be done within a school or nursery setting. You then have a traffic light system. So you have a green, amber, red, which will signify the level of intervention needed. And then the great thing is that once you've got that level of need identified, there is a big book of ideas, which comes with the screener. It's included in the toolkit. And that comes with lots of play-based activities to target specific gaps that have been identified in the screener. That can be done in groups. So if you've got a group of children with a similar speech and language need, then you can put those children together and provide an intervention. So again, reducing that load of one-to-one intervention, some of these ideas can be administered more widely. And those activities are adaptable. So they're designed to be stepped up or stepped down to match that child's individual ability level. So if they're making good progress, you can obviously move on. But actually, if you recognise that they're still struggling a little bit, then you can adapt down as well and then build up again. So looking beyond specific interventions, such as, well, the Welcome Toolkit, which is identifies and screens, and then you've got the big book of ideas. There are also a couple of other things that you can do to support language delay through just daily classroom habits. So things like a 10-second rule. So if you joined us for our working memory webinars, you'll know that actually that thinking time is really important, whether it's a speech and language delay or working memory delay. Give children at least 10 seconds of thinking time so that they can process a response and put that together before answering a question. Similarly, visual supports are really helpful. So using visual timetables, now and next boards to reduce that language load. So if they're developing speech and language, actually let's take a bit of the pressure away. How else can they communicate in those early stages alongside using speech and language? And then it's about modelling rather than correcting. So if a child said, I goed to the park, rather than correcting the go or I went, you would respond with, yes, you went to the park. So it's modelling the correct use of language without making that child feel discouraged. So it's modelling back rather than saying, oh no, you said that wrong, you should say. So again, it just builds that modelling in, which is really important. And then chunking instructions. So instead of saying, when you arrive at school, put your bag away, get your book out, sit on the carpet, that's a lot of instructions. If you've got a speech and language delay, processing that information to then have a response is actually quite a lot. So again, breaking down the instructions one step at a time. And then really importantly, engaging those parents and carers. They're a huge part of the child's journey. It doesn't all just happen in school. It is a collaborative effort. So if I just pop back to Welcome for a second, that's also designed to bridge that gap between school and home. So Welcome provides automated reports to show parents where a child is and what they're working on. And also there's some home activities as well. So that really helps with that consistency between home and school and helps embed those new language skills much faster. And then finally, we've got that monitoring and reviewing. So Welcome does enable you to regularly rescreen. So typically once a term. So you can track progress to see if a child has moved from red to amber or amber to green. You can then evidence that impact. So if you've got external inspectors or you're presenting to your senior leadership team, there's actually evidence there. It doesn't require you to do any further analysis. It's all there. And then obviously you've got that evidence that if a child did remain in that red zone, despite the intervention that you're putting in place, then you've got that evidence then ready to refer to external services as well. Just as Debbie mentioned with Myon and how suitable it can be to support those children who have EAL, Welcome can also be used for EAL students as well. So they can be screened in their strongest language and then use the big book of ideas to support their language development as well, while being mindful of their home language. So it can cross that border as well, which can be really useful when you're trying to identify what the barrier is. Is it a SEND barrier? Is it a language barrier? Is it a speech and language barrier? So many things that come into play. So it really does help to try and unpick where those barriers are. So I hope that's answered that question about how we can support speech and language. That's our 3 questions done for today. But I will pass over to Debbie to give us some top tips that we can be thinking about after the webinar.
Thank you, Polly. We hope you found the questions discussed today of interest. And as always, here's a roundup of things to consider. When looking at your reading data, if it is available, use the SAS, NRSS or equivalent scores rather than the reading age to identify these learners needing an intervention. Look for shifts in the SAS score or the NRSS, rather than just increases in reading age. A steady SAS indicates a child is maintaining progress, while an increasing SAS or NRSS shows more than expected progress. As I'm sure you are all aware, getting in early to intervene with any learning barriers is best practice. So consider those early identification strategies, particularly with regard to speech and language. Consider the assessments that are going to best suit the needs of your learners and give the most accurate information. We touched on a couple today, so just to recap, that was NGRT, STAR Reading, STAR Early Literacy, Welcome, and MyON. Just before we end for today, we'd just like to launch a quick poll in case any of you would like further information on these assessments.
Thank you, Debbie. Yes, so I hope all those that was of interest. Obviously, if you're using your own assessments that aren't Renaissance, that's absolutely fine. Just look for those key pieces of information within those reports. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'll next see you on the 10th of February when our SEND Searchlights will be focusing on how to support with access arrangements. So navigating the complexities of exam access arrangements is crucial, yet often time-consuming task, and there's always lots to it. So join us for that detailed practical webinar where we'll be focusing on hopefully helping you to streamline your processes. And we'll look at some tools again. So we'll look at the processes, but also offer you some tools alongside, so such as Exact and Recall, which you may already be using or they may be new to you. So we can talk about those. And the session will provide you with that knowledge required to confidently use those digital school tools to identify eligible students, how to gather that comprehensive evidence, and then complete that documentation ready for sending off. So thank you so much for joining us today. Have a good rest of the day, or have a good evening if you're just finishing for the day, and we will see you next month. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.